Welcome to the American Slang podcast, where we will explore language and culture in different regions of the United States. Slang is a type of informal language that's typically spoken in a certain area or by a group of people. Culture is dynamic, language is dynamic, and in this podcast, we will explore the connections between them and the way new words and expressions emerge in different places in America. So today I'm speaking with Elena Mutonono, a seasoned business coach for online language teachers who helps teachers work smarter, not harder. Elena's podcast is called Online Bound, where she shares strategies and tips related to marketing, coaching, and the world of online teaching. Elena has a multilingual identity and is a polyglot. Today, she's going to share a little bit about the culture and language in her city, New Orleans, Louisiana, a fascinating multicultural place in the United States. This month, Elena is launching the Smart Teachers Library. It's a community for online language teachers who want to grow their businesses. There are monthly group coaching sessions, courses, and collaborations with other online language teachers. So check out the link to the Smart Teachers Library in the show notes of this episode. I've been looking forward to our conversation for the longest time, and I'm sure the listeners are excited to hear about your culture, Elena's cultural surroundings, and all of the interesting linguistic features of New Orleans. So thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. This is so much fun to talk about something that I don't normally talk about, like the place where I currently live.
Mm-hmm. How would you describe it? Charming is not the word, right? Kind of.
Yeah. Well, first of all, the very first thing that I can hear when I heard your introduction is I need to give you a lesson on how to pronounce the name of the city. It's New Orleans. Okay.
New Orleans.
If you go to, when I first came here, like I also used to say New Orleans.
Yeah.
But nobody from New Orleans ever calls it anything but New Orleans or Nolans. Like it's almost Nola. Nola is what people call it, New Orleans, Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
And I live in Nola culture and stuff like that. So that's how people usually refer to it. And so, of course, when you say New Orleans, people are like, yeah, she's not from here. Yeah. So that's how I was when I first came. And of course, now I will never say New Orleans. Well, I'm glad
I mispronounced it so that we had this lesson of how to pronounce it correctly. So New Orleans.
New Orleans, yes.
Yeah. So tell us about is it the city? Is it sort of just a mix? It's very multicultural. It's
right. They call it a melting pot of everything, all the cultures. It is distinctly different from any other place. It's kind of, it's a birthplace of jazz music in the US, right? And Louis Armstrong Airport is is named after Louis Armstrong. So I really find the place very much like jazz, like there are lots of parallels. It's also very sort of chaotic. It's very it has its own architecture that takes after French and Spanish, which were like distinct influences in the area. It is a port city, seaport, and therefore, unlike the rest of the South, and geographically you could say, oh, New Orleans is south of the US. But, whenever they talk about Southern hospitality, it's a little different here. It's more like a party city, and it's more like life is easy. I felt it very strongly when at the beginning of December, just a few months ago, went to New York. Yeah. And one of my favorite things to do anywhere I go is go find a local coffee shop and go and hang out and just feel the city. And I went to New York and I just felt so uncomfortable because I'm used to in New Orleans, you go to a coffee shop, you sit and you like sip on your coffee, you talk to everybody, you're just like, you're
It's
there.
like a social
Yes,
experience.
yes.
Can you talk to people you don't know, you've never met before? Is
Yes.
it that
Oh,
friendly? Oh,
yes, yes.
really?
It is super friendly. It is like,
Wow.
people will start talking to you. And I guess I just got so used to it. I mean, people know what I want to, some coffee shops, what I want to, what I usually order.
They're like the
They
regular
remember,
miss.
yes, I'm the regular, yes, and nobody like ever pretends that they don't know me. And if they, have seen me, like, how are you doing? How's your daughter? Blah, blah, blah.
I love that
But yes,
friendliness.
but in New York, I remember just buying this coffee and then sitting down, feeling very awkward. Like, I'm not supposed to be sitting here. I'm supposed to be like grabbing coffee and on the go, go, go,
Mm-hmm.
go. And it's so different. And then I came back in the next week. My husband and I went to check out another coffee shop that we had seen, and we just walk in and like everybody's so like life is slow, nobody's running, nobody's rushing, you don't feel like this, it's just such a slow vibe.
Mm-hmm.
And I was sitting there drinking coffee with him, and I was like, wow, I can now see a huge difference between New Orleans and New York. Like, it is night and day. So yeah,
Wow.
so it's very laid back.
Mm-hmm.
People love to celebrate. It is like jazz, very chaotic, disorganized a little bit. There's lots of things that, don't even feel like you're in America. Sometimes I feel like, is
Mm-hmm.
this America? Is this, because of people may not feel like they're fast enough for you. If you are like somewhere in the, bigger cities up north, then it's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
go, 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 go. Here it's like, well, who cares? We'll just get this job done one way or another. And if not, life is great anyway. Let the good
Mm.
times roll is
Yeah, let the
the
good times
phrase.
roll. Oh, yeah.
So everybody's just going along with it, and it just feels so lovely. And
It
one,
sounds like a good place for creativity too, to be creative,
yes,
you
yes,
know.
yes. It's a great place for musicians.
Mm-hmm.
Many musicians came from here, but also artists and a lot of sort of non-conforming people
Mm-hmm.
that would not fit into any like particularly, suburban kind of culture in bigger cities. Well, medium-sized cities, because
Mm-hmm.
New Orleans is not really that big. It's I think about 600,000. So in other cities, they would probably feel a little awkward because of the, certain expectations of what you're supposed to look like. And here, like, people don't usually care.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot more free.
In
And
terms of fashion too, you can dress how you want to
fashion,
dress.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, particularly uptown, which is a very sort of modern place. Well, modern slash old architecturally, but
Mm-hmm.
modern in terms of people just being themselves and expressing themselves. And yeah, you can definitely see that, feel and feel that when you're there, like. And I feel it especially strongly when I get out of New Orleans and out of
Mm-hmm.
Louisiana and going up north, because you kind of miss order a little bit. It's like, and then you're going to Tennessee and all the roads are lovely and straight and there are no potholes and nothing. And you're like, oh, okay, okay, okay. I get it. I get the difference.
And so New Orleans, in terms of all of the French influence that we see, because I know the French was
Yeah.
spoken until like
Yes.
1830s as like the primary language. And so I know it's highly influenced food,
Yes.
the
Yes.
food
Yes.
culture there. So do you feel
Yes.
like restaurants are just like amazing to go? It's just
Oh yeah. Restaurants are places you absolutely want to go. I mean, and check out. It's going to be very difficult to choose.
mm-hmm,
There is a lot of French cuisine influence.
mm-hmm,
And they they're different. Like there's one called Creole, and
Mm-hmm.
Creole used to refer to the white elites of French origin who lived in the area from the 1800s. Later, they started mixing with the enslaved people, and then currently the word Creole is referring to the people of color. And then there's Cajun,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is a separate sort of group of people, but it can refer to people, it can refer to food as well. But it refers to a group of people that resettled from Acadia, from
Mm-hmm.
places like Nova Scotia in Canada, and it's referred to as Acadia in around 1700s.
Oh, wow.
And they were speaking French, and they did not want Canada to become, British. And so that's why they moved to this area. But mainly the Cajun people mainly lived on the land. They did not want to
Mm-hmm.
mix with kind of the other groups and
Mm-hmm.
people, and so that's what makes your cuisine so diverse, because you
Mm-hmm.
have influences from West Africa, because New Orleans was a port
Yeah.
city as well,
Uh-huh.
and so that is a lot, quite prominent. And then there's French cuisine,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a large Vietnamese population as well
Oh.
currently that came
Uh-huh.
later. And they have their own bakeries in the eastern part of New Orleans. So
You're making
it's
me want to move there.
no, I know. I always
Incredible.
think about it. And that's every time like you are around people from New Orleans and I'm becoming one of them. Like people
Yeah.
talk to me like, where should I go eat? Okay, what do you want? Let me tell you this and that. And yeah, my husband and I are big foodies, so we go to different places. And there are like, I think it's almost sacrilegious in New Orleans to go to a chain restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so like Applebee's that you can find everywhere, or
Mm-hmm.
like Panera Bread and other, like it's
Mm-hmm.
almost a waste of money. And it's kind
Yeah.
of like, no, you don't want to go to these big chains. You need to go to the local places, and
Mm-hmm.
there are plenty of those. And I'm such a food
Yes.
junkie. And here, restaurants, in order for a restaurant to survive in New Orleans, they just have to be so, so good. And
Yeah.
so the restaurants are absolutely amazing. Like, there is no, I mean, it's not like you will go and it's like, yeah, you've got a steak. If you got like here, people just really have to like go out of their way. If it's French,
Wow.
it's super like, I mean, it's really, really good. So I think that's like the big thing that I always miss
Mm-hmm.
from
Mm-hmm.
here. And I think take it for granted a little bit, like all the potlucks and people bring all this variety,
Mm-hmm.
and then you go some other places it's just more like bland,
I
like where
know
you're
there's
from,
so
like
much, and the food is kind of
potatoes, green
spicy
beans.
there,
Yes, yes,
right?
yes, yeah, it's
Yeah.
spicy and it's just very like so flavorful.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's really good. Like, I mean, people just really have to go out of their way to keep it. Your Japanese restaurant is going to be like super, super restaurant. Like even
Yes.
even if it's small and like in the part of town where it's not so well known, but they're trying to keep their ratings up and stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah, because I like shrimp etouffee, like a lot of the
yes.
words are French, right? The food
Yes.
names are French, and
Right. Yes.
yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And
So
Cajun
yeah.
seasoning. I've always heard about Cajun seasonings, very spicy, kind of
Yes.
paprika and lots of
Right. Yes. A
mixtures
lot
of
of them. Yes. And they mix this into a gumbo, which gumbo is like a
yeah.
local soup. Yeah. It can be made with meat gumbo.
Mm-hmm.
So they use specific sausage, and it can be a shrimp gumbo, because
Mm-hmm.
there's lots of that.
I was
But
going to
there's
ask you
like
about that because roux is something. I have Southern relatives from
yes,
Mississippi, so roux is flour and oil that you make the
yes,
kind of the base of the soup with, of the
yes.
gumbo with.
Mhm.
Is that French? It's French, right? It's a
Yes,
French.
it's
Yeah,
actually, yes, it actually has to be butter, I think. No, oil, you're right.
yeah,
But you need to be mixing it for so long. Like
yeah,
I had
yeah.
never, and you need to be very careful if you, because my husband and I, we
Mm,
took a class. My husband
yeah.
is the chef in
Oh,
the family, yes. And so last year for his birthday, I bought this class and we went in and he was like learning to make a roux and I was like taking
ooh.
pictures. So it was great. And we heard lots of stories. The guy that was our teacher, chef,
Mm-hmm.
he actually his grandmother was Cajun. He lived out there. And so Cajun also, it's like I said, it was all these people, French speaking people coming from Canada
Mm-hmm.
and settling here, and they brought their own culture and their own food and their own language even. So
Yeah.
they spoke their own sort of French, and now people are referring to it as Cajun French.
Mm-hmm.
And there are quite a few people in some rural areas outside of New Orleans. There's a place called Bro Bridge,
Mm.
which is quite famous. They have these like Zydeco music,
Oh, yeah.
yes, festival, and Zydeco music is also their local. And we went
Oh.
there and we met people. They're like out on the streets, people like retired people, but they're speaking French, and they come to you and they start
Oh,
speaking to you in
really?
French, and you're like, which country am I? Yes,
Wow.
and
So they've
so
maintained the French language over all of these years.
yes.
Wow.
And surprisingly, because the one person we talked to, he told us that his whole family spoke French, but the government, believe it or not, would not allow them to speak French at school. Like today, they have specific French immersion schools in New Orleans, right? And all over
Yeah.
Louisiana. And my kids
Uh-huh.
go to a French immersion school, and it's like a big deal. Like you
Yeah.
want to be bilingual, trilingual, whatever. But back in the day, they were forced to speak English, and they were actually
Wow.
punished at school. Like this old gentleman told me, for speaking French
Mm-hmm.
to their peers or siblings that went to school with them. It's a really rich cultural place, and all these, and there's still a lot of unfortunate slavery history,
Mm-hmm.
and there's still plantations that are open
Mm-hmm.
as museums. And some of them are used, some plantations, sadly to me personally, tragically, are
Mm-hmm.
used for special events. And I always feel like
Mm.
really repulsive, like
Yeah.
inside. But before I knew that, it was like, oh yeah, so and so's wedding is at this plantation. And you go in, it's like, oh, these pretty pictures and all that, but you don't realize what
Mm-hmm.
was happening, here a
Yeah.
long time ago. And people are kind of, some of them are sort of oblivious, which I think is quite
Yeah.
common for especially white America. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, we have, conquered racism, and we
Uh-huh.
now,
Kind
like
of erase
all
that
cultures. Yeah,
history,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it happened
Mm-hmm.
sometime in the 60s. Now we have the Civil Rights Act, and we forgot all about the inequality, and now we're all equal. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, because you're white. That's why you're saying this. But yeah, so there is that heritage, and it's quite, sad still. There's still
Mm-hmm.
names of the Confederate generals that they named streets with. Yeah, believe it or not.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the word plantation is almost like, yeah, plantation here, plantation there. So unfortunately, that's still a part of
Mm-hmm.
it.
Mm-hmm.
I am so used to the names and the way they sound. So let's say it's very common for someone from around here for a woman to be called Jean.
Oh, really? What,
Yes,
and so
right.
what does that mean? Like Miss?
J E. Well,
Oh,
it's
you're saying as
just
the
the name.
name, a
Yeah, the
person's
name.
name would
So
be Jean.
usually,
Oh.
yes, usually it's spelled Jean, either that or Jeanne.
Ah.
And if they go elsewhere outside of New Orleans, people would call them Jeannie,
Jean,
right?
yeah, or Jeannie
Yeah,
or
or
Jean,
Jeannie,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
But here, if I see this name, I will always pronounce it as Jean. And I yeah, I have, the ladies that I've known like older,
Uh-huh.
um and they would always, it's like Jean, it's Marie, it's all these kind of French ladies'
Interesting.
names, yes,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
particularly like local. And so that is kind of the legacy of the French language for those who do not speak it. But otherwise, if you want to learn and to speak French,
Mm-hmm.
I think this place has a lot to offer,
Yeah.
because particularly, Cajun French and Cajun
Uh-huh.
culture and Zydeco music and all that.
Yeah. And it's even in the Mardi Gras
Mm.
language and the Mardi Gras culture as well.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
there's also Native American influence as well, because I know that during Carnival, there are, the Native American influence as well comes up, right? In the
Yes.
parades.
I am not a big parade person. I am
Hmm.
quite introverted. I
Yeah.
did go to see the parades in the beginning because that was the big deal. And they're so big. Like
Yeah.
during Mardi Gras, my whole family, well, everything stops. Like New Orleans has Mardi Gras breaks at school that are 1 week long. And that is usually when other kids are still at school, but here it's like, everybody's on break. Monday and Tuesday, which is the Tuesday is the Fat Tuesday of the Mardi Gras, and Monday is the Lundi or Lundi,
Hmm.
because and they call it Lundi Gras, because
Yeah.
it's so those 2 days are usually off for all,
Ah,
like all banks are closed. You can't
wow,
clear
for the
shit.
whole
You can't,
city.
like,
But
yes,
just New Orleans,
right,
not the
yes.
other part of Louisiana. It would
No,
just be
I am not sure about the other part of Louisiana,
okay.
because some of them adapt and adjust.
Okay.
But I can speak for New Orleans. It's so common to just have all this time off, and
Yeah, like you said, it's more laid back. So maybe there are more vacations and more days off.
right, right. And
Uh-huh.
so there's a lot of going back to Native Americans, there's also a lot of voodoo influence, which of course
Ah,
that comes from
yes.
West Africa.
Uh-huh.
And particularly when the ships came in with the enslaved people and they stayed here. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the culture that they brought in. And so it's very common to see, voodoo dolls or voodoo
Yeah.
collars, and people that are practicing voodoo religion as well,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
locally. So, and a lot of, like I said, names, and names of the streets that are pronounced in a French way, like
Uh-huh.
Jean Lafitte, for example, Jean Lafitte.
Uh-huh.
So that would be, you don't pronounce it Jean Lafitte or whatever. So you have to always like be conscious of like, how do you pronounce? But there's some streets in New Orleans that are, you can definitely tell the name is Native Americans, like Chapatulas.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like another street in the city, and so there's I think quite a big influence of that as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Wow, it's such a unique city and
It really
an
is,
incredible
yes.
place to live.
It's a kind of like a microculture, micro world by
Mm-hmm.
itself.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
when people say that it's different, it really is different. It's like nothing else. Like any other place,
Mm-hmm.
like I go North Carolina, Tennessee, maybe Kentucky, and you can sort of swap the cities, and
Mm-hmm.
they look similar and
Mm-hmm.
feel similar, except, like Nashville has its own thing. I just find that New Orleans is like so different. It looks European, feels a
Mm-hmm.
little bit not European, not in the sense like Boston. Boston is European and clean. New
Yeah.
Orleans is European, disorganized, stuff falls apart. It's like, oh yeah.
It's a little dirty, a little
Yeah,
chaotic.
it is. Yeah, it is very
Mm-hmm.
chaotic. So I think that's the cool part, is that it's so, I guess it just like gets into you, and then you're like,
Mhm.
oh, and then you can't, in a way, you hate to leave, of course, with the climate change and the impact it has had on New Orleans, and the fact that the water levels are rising.
Yeah.
So it's very tricky where you live,
Mhm.
and but
Mhm.
in the past, I heard from people that, are locals and they've lived their entire lives and their families lived here. They told me that nobody ever evacuated for hurricanes. Now,
Really?
I also think that probably people didn't know, as we know
Uh-huh.
today about the hurricanes and the strength, usually people are like, whatever, we're just going to stay.
Uh-huh.
Um,
It's a very
but
resilient city because it's
yes.
withstood countless hurricanes.
Yes,
Yes.
yes. And some of the people just choose to stay and rough it.
Hmm.
And usually it's like it's pretty uncomfortable because it's hot around that time, really hot, and
Hmm.
the temperature goes up, and when the power goes out, then you might be without power for like weeks.
Really?
Particularly the last hurricane, we were without power for like 10 days or 2 weeks.
Oh
Now, I
no,
was
how
not,
scary.
we were able to, we knew that it was like a big hurricane, so we had evacuated. But a lot of people stay, and then they have their own generators, and they have
Yeah.
their own solar panels, and they have this and that. And when the hurricane goes through, they just, they have parties. The day before the hurricane, people are grilling meat and
Did you
hamburgers
go
and
up
making
north to stay with
gumbo.
friends, or how did you?
Yes,
Yeah, you
yes.
just stayed with friends.
We have an evacuation plan.
Yeah.
Mostly we just tell our friends, like, is it okay this season if something happens for us
Yeah.
to come to you?
Yeah.
And that's usually how it's worked. But so far we've
Hmm.
only had to evacuate twice, for
Hmm.
Isaac and for Ida. Other times it just so happened, like, you really never know where it's going to hit,
Hmm. Hmm.
so
Hmm.
sometimes it was like a strong hurricane, but it just went into another direction, so
Hmm.
either goes towards Texas or other parts of Louisiana. So but it's quite precarious, and that's not for everybody.
Yeah, it's a little risky in some
It is.
ways, but maybe the
Yeah.
advantages of the city outweigh the disadvantages of
Right.
the
And like
erratic weather
living,
patterns.
yes, people that are musicians, like you said, creatives, and people that just like food, and like, the life that is not hushed and hurried.
Hmm.
I don't know. When I was in New York, I was glad to be done with my trip. Like, I really
Yeah,
enjoyed seeing all those amazing places, but it's like the tempo, the fast pace is just not for
hmm.
me.
The hustle
Um,
and the bustle is a bit too much, isn't it, in New
right,
York?
right.
Yeah.
Like I was saying, like I just felt so weird. It's almost like, why am I sitting in this cafe? There's nobody, literally nobody, and they have seats there. There's nobody in this cafe. But people keep coming in, getting their coffee on their way, in, out,
Uh-huh.
in, out. And it was so cold outside. Like, who wants to be walking like in this cold, like with this cup of coffee? But it's just a normal thing, I guess. The very first time when I heard about this area,
Hmm.
I had certain expectations of what it would feel like and look like.
Hmm.
And then I came here, and it has a lot more in common with the Europe that I'm sort of used to, and even
Yeah.
sometimes with its chaos.
Uh-huh.
Um, it reminds me of places where I grew up, like in Ukraine, where
Yeah.
systems sometimes are broken systems, bureaucracy, and all that. Um, it has more in common with that than in the rest of the US.
Hmm.
And that's why it makes it kind of almost doesn't feel like I'm in America sometimes. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
okay. This feels familiar. But yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Have you ever
Yeah.
been? Would you like to
Yeah,
come
I have
sometime?
visited New Orleans a few times with my family because I have family in Mississippi and
Oh,
in
yes.
yeah, down
Where in
south in
Mississippi?
Louisiana. On the coast. Yeah.
Okay.
like near Biloxi. I don't
Biloxi,
know.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. Biloxi, Gulfport, yeah,
Yeah,
all those
Gulfport,
places.
the coast. And basically, and my grandmother was originally from Jackson, and so we always went
Mm.
to Jackson, but then they moved down to the coast, so we would always go to the coast. But we did go to New Orleans a few times. New Orleans. I want to
New
make sure I'm
Orleans,
pronouncing it right.
yes,
New
yes.
Orleans. And it was incredible. I
Yeah.
mean,
Mm.
like what you said, the beignets. I remember going and getting
Yeah,
coffee and beignets and these kind of
yes,
donuts, these
yes,
French,
yes.
I guess they're French. I don't know
Yes,
where they come from as
they're
well.
deep fried.
Deep
They're
fried
beignets,
kind
deep
of
fried doughy
donuts.
things. Yeah.
And I just remember eating all of the Cajun shrimp and the delicious dishes. And then we would always
Yes.
go out and hear music because my mom is a huge fan of jazz and hearing live
Mm.
music in New Orleans. So
Oh,
New Orleans,
yes.
sorry, I'm gonna have to get that.
All
And I
right,
just remember the city, and I
you'll get it
remember
right
going to
very
the
soon.
docks with my
Mm.
brother, and there was this guy, this old African American guy singing, "Sitting on the dock of the bay, watching the waves." You know that Otis Redding song? And he was singing
Uh,
that song on the dock, and I just
oh,
remember,
I can totally see
it's
some.
so peaceful, what a relaxing place. And yeah, a really neat city to visit.
Yeah, yeah, it's very good to visit, and it's good to visit around Mardi Gras if you like to party
Parties.
and to experience parades. It's good to visit around the time like about now if you don't want to
Mm-hmm.
get the hot weather,
Mm-hmm.
or sometime after mid-October, maybe November.
Mm-hmm.
That's
And you
when it
can
actually cools
also,
off.
have you ever tried alligator?
Oh, yes.
Yes,
Alligator
they serve that in
sausage,
some of the restaurants. That was the first time and the last
alligator,
time I've tried alligator before.
alligator sausage, and turtle soup. Those are
Really?
delicacies, local delicacies, and turtle soup is incredible. Like it's just so good. I mean, it doesn't taste like
Really?
turtle, not that I know how turtle tastes, but
Uh-huh.
it's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's really good. And Commander's Palace is one of the top-notch restaurants where presidents usually eat, and you
Oh.
can go and have lunch there, and it's not like
Mm-hmm.
skyrocketing prices if you get lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember going and we just ordered like turtle soup, and it's incredible. And the level of service, they usually have 3 servers per person, which
Wow.
is very
Yeah.
unusual, but they always like make sure that you feel loved and cared for.
The service is impeccable. That's another thing
Yes.
that's different in New Orleans,
Mhm.
because in other parts of the country it's very slow. And I've heard that
Yeah.
service is just kind of going downhill in many other places because of the pandemic. People just don't want to work in the restaurants. So there's like a shortage
Yeah.
of servers. I don't know if that's the
Mhm.
case there or not,
That
but
was the case, yes, but I think it's coming
it's
back.
coming
It's coming
back.
back. It just
Yeah.
really depends on what restaurant it is, but
Uh-huh.
yeah, they can't afford not
Mm-hmm.
to do that because
It's
that's
competitive,
how
it sounds like there.
right. Yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
how it gets all of its revenue. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this incredible information. And I think your people are going to love hearing about
Oh,
this, because
yes,
we
Anne,
always
thank
hear,
you so
other
much. Yes.
sides of this, the business side of the
Oh, yeah, I
online
love,
world.
yeah, right. I really enjoy that. Thank you for inviting me. I love chatting about stuff that,
Yes, this cultural experience has been incredible. We've almost traveled there with you, I think, during this conversation,
oh,
and
that's good.
experienced a little bit of it.
Yes, thank you so much.
It was such a pleasure to talk to Elena today about New Orleans. First of all, I learned that I've been mispronouncing the name of that city my entire life. I'm not sure how, but as you know, the insiders all pronounce it New Orleans, and they can identify the tourists so easily, right? And also, I've just really enjoyed hearing her perspective about all the cultural diversity and how it's kind of shows up in the names and the street names and people's names and all the French influence, and how much she just likes hanging out in some of the coffee shops. And her experience, going to New York was really telling, and it showed so much about the place. Like, I think a lot of times you have to leave your own city to realize how laid back it is, or it's, you know, how much of a chill vibe New Orleans has. Oh, I'm gonna catch myself saying that word wrong so many times. So overall, I'm sure this episode makes you want to travel there and visit the city, experience it for yourself. And if you can't travel there, well, we've traveled there with Elena through this episode. Elena is such an incredible person, and what a multicultural background she has. And I know she just got American citizenship after living in the States for so long. And she has to tell us about that journey in another episode. I hope you've enjoyed the American Slang podcast this time. It's been really cool to have you listening. And also, upcoming shows, I think, are going to be about Maine and a little bit about the lifestyle and culture in Maine. And then I am considering changing the season to something more about biculturality, bicultural identities, and how people maybe perhaps move and live, and what it's like to live in and be in two different worlds, and that experience. So have an amazing day, and I'll see you next time. Don't hesitate to reach out if you love it, and give the podcast a high top rating if you love listening to it. That would be so great if I could get some more positive reviews. Have a great day. Talk to you later.